Story number 1. My son George has always had the strangest friends. I am not sure why, but during his earlier years, he always seemed to attract what most people would consider the weird kids. I have plenty of stories about this, but one in particular stands out clearly in my memory. At the time, George was in the 4th grade. We had just moved to a new town because of my husband's job reassignment. George was starting fresh at a new school. Fortunately, he had always been an outgoing and friendly child, so my husband and I were not very worried about his ability to make new friends. As a family, we were adjusting well, and everything seemed to be going smoothly for him at school. I was honestly very pleased the first time I met the parents of George's classmates. They all seemed like kind, honest, and respectable people. A few months after the move, I received a call from George's school. It was in the middle of the day, and they asked that one of his parents come in immediately to discuss an incident involving George and another student. My husband was at work, so I agreed to come in. I would be meeting with the principal after picking up my son. As I drove to the school, I felt a strange mix of anger and confusion. I was angry because I assumed George may have gotten into a fight, and if I found out he had started it, he would certainly face consequences. But I was also confused. Physical fights were completely out of character for George. He had never been that kind of child, and that made the situation even more concerning. As we walked toward the principal's office, I tried asking him what had happened. To my surprise, he refused to answer. That was very unusual for him. Normally, George was extremely talkative, the kind of child who would share every small detail about his day. His sudden silence felt unsettling. I figured he might be feeling embarrassed or scared, so I decided not to push him too hard. When we arrived at the principal's office, the principal asked George to wait in the sitting area outside. I left him there and followed the principal inside. He closed the door behind me and motioned for me to sit in the chair in front of his desk. Then he began asking me questions about George's behavior. The usual ones parents often hear. How is his behavior at home? Does he listen when spoken to? Does he talk back? Is he respectful toward others? I answered truthfully. I had nothing but positive things to say. George was a very well-behaved, respectful, and kind-hearted child. And that was not just the mother and me talking. I was simply telling the objective truth. Eventually, the principal explained why I had been called in. Apparently, George had gotten into a brief altercation with a classmate after recess. The boy's name was Sebastian. Naturally, I asked about the circumstances of the fight, and this is what the principal told me. Both George and Sebastian had been the last 2 students outside after recess. As they were walking up the stairs together, George suddenly pulled an eraser out of his pocket and struck Sebastian over the head with it. Sebastian fell to the ground and started screaming. I was absolutely baffled. This was completely unlike George. He would never do something like that without being provoked. Even more confusing was the fact that I had heard plenty about Sebastian before. George always spoke fondly of him, like they were close friends. I pressed the principal with more questions, trying to understand what led up to this. But he did not seem to have many answers. In the end, he admitted that no one had actually witnessed the incident. However, both boys had told the same story independently. Their details matched. The principal then reassured me that George was not in any real trouble. He explained that little fights like this were not uncommon at that age. He just wanted to inform me about what had happened. No further action would be taken. That definitely helped calm me down. After that, the meeting ended, and I was excused. As I drove George home, he remained completely silent about the whole thing. Not a word. It was only right before bedtime that he finally opened up to me. Admittedly, I had grown frustrated with his silence, and that might be what finally made him decide to speak. When he did, the story he told me left me stunned. George explained that Sebastian had tricked him. I asked him what he meant. He said they had been playing a game of make-believe, pretending to be characters from Street Fighter. It was Sebastian's idea. As part of the game, Sebastian told George to pull out an eraser and use it for a knockout move. When George did, Sebastian suddenly fell to the ground and started pretending to be badly hurt. Then, while lying there, Sebastian whispered in George's ear, telling him that he would seriously hurt him if George didn't go along with the story and pretend that he had really attacked him. So, that is exactly what George did. And of course, when the teachers saw what was happening, they naturally assumed it had been a real fight. I was furious. My little boy had been manipulated and falsely accused. Instead of going to the school about it, I decided I would handle things myself. That night, I went through the school's directory and found Sebastian's mother's contact information. I found her phone number and gave her a call. She introduced herself as Maggie. I was honestly a little taken aback by how sweet and genuine she sounded on the phone. She told me she had already heard about the incident, gotten the real story from Sebastian, and had reprimanded him. It struck me as a bit strange that Sebastian would confess the truth to his mother so quickly, but I was relieved. At least I did not have to do any convincing. Maggie went on to explain that Sebastian had always dealt with some minor behavioral problems while growing up. She said that sometimes, he would think and act like an entirely different person. The more she spoke, the more I actually started to feel bad. It seemed like Sebastian was not fully in control of some of his actions. Maggie suggested that the boys have a sleepover to make up for what had happened and help them build a better friendship. I thought that was a great idea. She even offered to host, which I appreciated. That weekend, I drove over to her house with George, who had already returned to his usual, bubbly, talkative self. Maggie invited me inside, and the two of us got to know each other over some wine while the boys played together in the basement. Just like over the phone, Maggie seemed like a kind, genuine, and respectable person. I genuinely enjoyed her company. The time flew by without me even realizing it. Eventually, though, I could not help but bring up Sebastian's behavior. It had been bugging me ever since the incident. When I asked, Maggie's entire demeanor shifted. She lowered her voice slightly and explained that Sebastian often struggled to make friends. She told me that he had seen a few doctors over the years, and they all believed it was something he would eventually outgrow. She went on to say that he had actually gotten much better at controlling himself lately, and the fact that he was being more social at school was seen as a good sign. I did not ask for more details. I just wanted to make sure that my son would be safe for the night. Maggie reassured me that George was in good hands. She explained that Sebastian did not have a history of being violent or aggressive, he just sometimes acted strange. That was enough reassurance for me. Maggie seemed completely sincere. And honestly, it felt nice knowing that George might actually be helping Sebastian learn how to form friendships. Eventually, it came time for me to leave. I went downstairs to say goodbye to George. The two boys were sitting on the floor, laughing and playing Battleship. It looked like they were getting along really well. I kissed my son goodbye, wished them a fun night, and drove back home. The next morning, I headed over to pick him up. When I arrived, George was already waiting near the front door with all of his stuff packed and a big smile on his face. I assumed everything went perfectly fine. I greeted Maggie, helped pack George's things into the car, and then we started driving home. But only a few minutes into the drive, George suddenly started crying. Out of nowhere, completely unexpected. I immediately asked him what was wrong, my voice filled with concern. And what he told me left me completely stunned. George said everything had been perfectly fine until it was time to go to sleep. The boys had set up their sleeping arrangements in the basement, 2 air mattresses side by side. Everything seemed normal when they went to bed. But at some point during the night, George woke up. He was not sure why at first. Then, he heard something whispering. The sound was coming from the bathroom. The door was slightly open, and inside, there was this strange, flickering light. Not like the regular bathroom light, George said. It was something else. George described it in detail. He said the light coming from the bathroom looked more like candlelight than anything else. He listened closely and realized it was Sebastian talking. But it wasn't just simple talking. Sebastian was having a full conversation. At first, George thought maybe Sebastian was on the phone or using some kind of walkie-talkie. But the more he listened, the stranger it became. Sebastian wasn't calling himself Sebastian. Instead, he kept referring to himself as Mr. Jim. George felt completely frozen. It was as if Sebastian truly believed he was someone else. And the strangest part, he wasn't speaking to anyone. He was simply talking to the bathroom mirror. Then, suddenly, the candle went out. The bathroom went completely dark. George squeezed his eyes shut and pretended to be asleep. He lay there, holding his breath, too scared to move. A long time passed. Then, he heard the bathroom door slowly creak open. His stomach dropped when the whispering started again. This time, it was right above him. The whispering continued for a while, but George couldn't understand any of it. The words didn't even sound like English. He stayed as still as possible, terrified, not daring to open his eyes. Eventually, he heard Sebastian climb back into his bed like nothing had happened. And in the morning, Sebastian acted totally normal, as if the night before had never happened. George didn't dare ask him about it. He just wanted to go home. When George told me what had happened, I was horrified. My gut told me that this wasn't just a case of childhood imagination. Something was seriously wrong. I didn't know exactly what to do, but I knew I had to tell someone. So, I called Maggie. At first, she laughed it off, saying Sebastian had always been a very creative kid. But as I pressed her for answers, her voice started to falter. Eventually, she admitted that Sebastian's so-called behavioral problems were far more serious than she had originally let on. She confessed that one psychiatrist had even suggested that Sebastian was showing signs of multiple personality disorder. Then, in a hushed tone, she revealed that they had already moved twice before, because Sebastian had been kicked out of school. I was stunned and furious. Why hadn't she told me any of this before? Why would she knowingly put my son in danger like that? Then, she did something completely unexpected. She begged me not to notify the school. I was speechless. Part of me wanted to respect her wishes. But another part of me knew deep down that something was very, very wrong. I blurted out a quick, "Okay," and hung up the phone before she could say anything else. I told myself I'd make my decision by the end of the week. But I never got the chance. That Monday, Sebastian Fallon attacked another student during recess. It was serious enough that the school immediately sent. The school sent out a statement to all the parents, but they kept the details vague. By the end of the day, I found out that Sebastian had been expelled. I tried calling Maggie, but her phone had suddenly been disconnected. The whole situation felt incredibly unsettling. Just days ago, we had spoken, and now, out of nowhere, she was completely unreachable. I wasn't even sure what I wanted to say to her. I just knew I needed to say something. I checked the school directory again, hoping there might be another phone number or an email address. But there was nothing. Just that one number, now disconnected. A few days passed, and the curiosity became too overwhelming. I couldn't take it anymore. So, I bit the bullet and drove over to their house. When I arrived, it was completely vacated. No moving trucks. No sign of a rushed departure. Just gone. It didn't make any sense. How could they have disappeared so quickly, without leaving a single trace? I started searching for them online. I looked everywhere. Social media, public records, anything I could think of. But there was nothing. No forwarding address. No recent posts. No mentions. It was as if Maggie and Sebastian had never existed at all. That was a long time ago now. George, thankfully, was not too badly affected by any of it. In fact, I think he has mostly forgotten the whole thing. But I haven't. I still think about it often. About what could have happened to my son that night in that basement. Or worse, what kind of things that boy, Sebastian, has been doing since. Story number 2. My upbringing was a little unorthodox. I grew up in a Southern Baptist household, the kind where we didn't believe in ghosts but were absolutely certain about demons. Let me explain. If something strange happened, it was never considered a spirit or a wandering soul. It was always something darker, something biblical. I never fully bought into it, but that message was drilled into me from a very young age. Rejecting demons meant rejecting Scripture itself. My mother, however, was different. For her, faith was optional. She wasn't an atheist or even agnostic. She was simply indifferent. Whenever I asked her about going to church, she would shrug and say things like, "God and I have an understanding." While I leaned into religion as a source of structure and stability, my mother drifted further away from it. It was just one of the many things that widened the gap between us. I won't sugarcoat it. My mother struggled with addiction and serious mental health issues. She never wanted help for any of it. Some days, she was functional. Other days, she was completely unpredictable, sometimes even terrifying. Looking back now, it's clear she was dealing with schizophrenia or something very similar. Before anyone assumes my family was neglectful, it's important to remember that it was a different time back then. Mental health was not something people openly talked about. One afternoon, I had a nightmare so vivid that I still remember every detail to this day. In the dream, I was lying in bed when my mother stormed into my room in a fit of rage. She grabbed me by the wrist and started shaking me violently while screaming at the top of her lungs. I woke up in a pool of sweat, my body still stiff with fear. But before I could shake off the nightmare, it happened. The door suddenly flew open, and there she was. Just like in the dream. Same expression. Same wild, unhinged anger. Same exact words. It felt like the nightmare had been some kind of warning, a glimpse of what was about to happen. I barely managed to push her away and yell for her to stop. And just like that, it was over. She turned around and walked away as if nothing had happened. The next morning, when I confronted her about it, she had no memory of what had happened. None at all. She looked confused, even hurt, by how shaken I was. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Some strange overlap between my subconscious and her unpredictable moods. But a part of me quietly wondered if it was something worse. A few weeks later, I heard her screaming from the backyard. But this time, it wasn't a scream of fear or panic. It sounded excited. Almost gleeful. I ran outside and froze in place at what I saw. My mother was standing in the yard, grinning from ear to ear, holding a massive 7-foot-long snake in her bare hands. That alone was terrifying. But there is something you need to understand that made it even worse. My mother had a lifelong phobia of snakes. She couldn't even look at them on television without recoiling in fear. Yet there she was, gripping one like it was nothing. Smiling like she was proud of it. She looked straight at me and said, "Come here," while motioning for me to grab the snake. I stepped back, shaking my head. My voice trembled as I said, "Mom, what are you doing?" The look in her eyes told me she couldn't even comprehend what I was saying. Her smile grew even wider, and she tilted her head in this unnatural way, like she was trying to scare me on purpose. I couldn't deal with it. I turned and ran back inside, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding in my chest. I peeked out the window and saw her still standing there, holding the snake like some kind of offering. Eventually, she let it slither onto the ground and casually walked back inside, acting like nothing had ever happened. Later, when I asked her about it, she just shrugged like I was making it all up. She told me I must have had a strange dream and refused to entertain the conversation any further. As strange as that was, it was nothing compared to what I'm about to tell you. That winter, my church held an overnight lock-in. I was relieved to go. Church was my escape, a place where I could be around predictable, normal people. My mother dropped me off completely sober. She even kissed my forehead before driving away. Around 4:30 in the morning, just as we were settling into sleep, a loud knocking echoed through the chapel. Everyone sat up, glancing at one another. The knocking moved. It circled the building in a way that seemed impossible. At times, it sounded like it was coming from multiple directions at once. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. This was rhythmic. Purposeful. Like someone, or something, was trying to get inside. The pastor, the only one with a key, was asleep in his office and hadn't heard any of it. I rushed to wake him. The moment he stepped into the chapel, the knocking stopped. He opened the front doors, and I watched as he literally stumbled back in fear. Standing there, barefoot and sweating in the freezing cold, was my mother. Her clothes were disheveled. Her hair was drenched with sweat. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. She didn't acknowledge the pastor at all. Her eyes locked straight onto me. A slow, unsettling smile stretched across her face as she stepped toward me. I wanted to run, but I felt completely powerless. The pastor whispered, "Stay here," trying to hold me back. But it was like I had no choice. Something pulled me toward her. I climbed into the car, terrified of what might happen next. But she didn't do anything. The drive home was completely silent. She didn't speak. She didn't explain. She didn't even answer when I asked her why she was there. When we got home, she stopped in the doorway and just stared at me. She stood there silently, watching as I walked to my room. I closed my door, locked it, and lay awake for hours, listening. In the morning, I found her in the kitchen cooking breakfast. She was cheerful. Acting completely normal. As if nothing had happened. The moment she saw me, she jumped back in surprise and said she was just about to pick me up from the church. I felt the blood drain from my face. She had no memory of knocking on the church doors. No memory of driving me home. Nothing at all. It was terrifying. I expected someone, the pastor, a church elder, even one of the chaperones, to say something about what had happened. But no one did. It was like they didn't know how to process it. Or worse, they didn't want to. That was how people treated my mom back then. This was decades ago. She's gone now. But her memory is something that will never leave me, for better or for worse. I don't know if I believe in demons or the supernatural anymore. But I still can't explain what happened. The logical answer is that she was suffering from mental illness. Maybe it was addiction withdrawal. Maybe something else entirely. But the memory lapses, the strange timing, the way she sometimes acted like a completely different person, those things still haunt me. I try to tell myself there is a rational explanation for all of it. But even now, I'm not sure I believe that. Story number 3. My eldest son started sleepwalking when he was about 8 or 9 years old. I had heard of kids going through phases like that, so I wasn't too concerned at first. It just seemed like one of those things. A little unsettling, sure, but nothing I thought much about. I'm a pretty light sleeper, so none of my kids have ever been able to sneak around the house at night without me knowing. That's actually how I first discovered my son's sleepwalking habit. Most nights, I'd wake up and find him standing in the hallway outside my bedroom. He would be walking slightly on his heels, shifting his weight from foot to foot. His eyes would be open, but they weren't seeing anything. That was the one part that always got to me. For anyone who has lived with a sleepwalker, you know exactly what I mean. His gaze would pass right through me, empty and distant, like he was looking past me into something I couldn't see. It was always deeply unsettling. I never fully got used to finding him like that. Sometimes, he would mumble something under his breath, words too soft and slurred to understand. Other times, he wouldn't make a sound at all. He would just stand there, breathing in this slow, steady rhythm that somehow made it even worse. I would gently guide him back to bed, whispering his name and telling him everything was fine. He never remembered any of it in the morning. Not once. Things escalated a few months after I realized he was sleepwalking. One night, I woke up to a rhythmic tapping sound. It sounded like water droplets falling onto a window pane. Only, it wasn't raining outside. The sound was soft, barely loud enough to wake me. At first, I thought it was part of a dream. Just some far-off noise that my half-asleep brain had misinterpreted. But as I lay there listening, the sound continued. It was steady. Deliberate. Not sporadic like rainfall or random creaks of an old house. This was precise. The tapping came at regular intervals. Always the same volume. Always the same pace. I kept listening, trying to figure out what it could be. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't the wind outside. It was too precise, too intentional. Once I realized the tapping wasn't going to stop, I sighed and accepted that I'd have to get up and deal with it. I sat up and looked toward the door, which was where the sound was coming from. My husband was fast asleep, and I didn't want to disturb him. I should mention, I wasn't scared. Just curious. Otherwise, I probably would have woken him up. I got out of bed and stepped into the hallway. That's when I saw him. My son. He was facing the wall, his forehead gently knocking against it in slow, measured taps. His fingertips grazed the wall in rhythm with his forehead, as if he was trying to walk through it. I remember whispering his name, my voice barely above a breath. He didn't react. He just kept pressing his head forward, knocking it in that strange, rhythmic way. It was like he was testing something. Like he was trying to push through. I stepped closer, but right before I was about to touch him, I hesitated. Something about the way he was moving sent a chill straight through me. A chill ran straight through me. I gently reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder, shaking him just enough to pull him out of whatever trance he was in. He blinked, stepped back, and then, as if nothing had happened, let me guide him back to bed. He never mentioned it the next morning. It happened a few more times after that, but not often. To be honest, I figured it was just another strange habit of sleepwalkers. Maybe it was some kind of subconscious response to the wall being there. A weird internal sense of space his dreaming mind hadn't accounted for. Eventually, he outgrew it. The sleepwalking stopped. The vacant staring in the hallway became nothing more than a strange little memory I mostly forgot about. That is, until my younger son started doing the same thing years later. The sleepwalking, I mean. At first, I brushed it off. Kids go through phases. Sometimes behaviors repeat themselves. It was strange, but not unheard of. It was uncanny, though, that both of them started sleepwalking around the same age. Still, I told myself it wasn't anything unusual. Genetics are a funny thing. But eventually, I started noticing the little details. The things that slowly made my unease grow into genuine concern. It wasn't just that he sleepwalked. It was how he sleepwalked. He stood in the hallway, shifting from foot to foot. His eyes were open but completely unfocused. He moved in that same slow, unsettling rhythm. The same rhythm his older brother had shown years ago. It didn't feel random. It felt intentional. Watching him was like living through a memory. Like stepping right back into those nights when I had seen his brother doing the exact same thing. But this time, it got worse. One night, I woke up to that same tapping sound. I already knew what I would see before I even stepped into the hallway. And I was right. There he was. His forehead pressed to the exact same spot on the wall, knocking against it softly but rhythmically. It was like he was trying to step into something that wasn't there. The way he stood. The way his fingers brushed the wall in sync with the tapping. It was the exact same behavior I had seen from my older son years ago. I called his name. Nothing. I touched his shoulder. Still nothing. He just kept knocking. His small body swaying slightly, completely lost in some deep, unreachable place. That's when it hit me. He had never seen his older brother sleepwalk. At least, not that I know of. His brother hadn't done this in years. There was no reason at all, for him to mimic the exact same behavior. Not just the wandering. Not just the standing in the hallway. But the tapping. The same eerie, misplaced urgency in every movement. I don't know why, but that realization made me feel sick. After some frantic nudging, I finally managed to snap him out of it. I guided him back to bed, tucked him in, and tried to convince myself it was just one of those strange things. And then, just like his brother, he outgrew it. No more sleepwalking. No more tapping. He had no recollection of it either. For years, I didn't think about it. Honestly, I had almost forgotten the whole thing. But there's a reason I'm writing this now. Both of my sons are away at college. The house is quieter than I'm used to. To fill the downtime, my husband and I decided to renovate the house. It's an old house. We've lived in it long enough that it felt like time for a change. New floors. New paint. Just some fresh updates to make the place feel new again. It was all minor work. Nothing intensive. But then, something happened. We were stripping off the old wallpaper when we noticed something underneath. At first, I thought it was just some old backing or maybe a weird stain. But as we peeled more away, I felt my breath catch. It was an old mirror. Antique. Built directly into the wall. A mirror that someone had intentionally covered up. My first thought was, why? Why would anyone cover a mirror instead of just removing it? I stood there staring at it, feeling ridiculous. It was just glass. It wasn't going to do anything. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to find it. Like it had been sealed away for a reason. And then, I realized something that made my stomach twist. The mirror was positioned in the exact spot on the wall where my sons had been bumping their foreheads all those years ago. The memories came flooding back. There was no logical reason they should have known it was there. They couldn't have known. It was completely hidden behind layers of wallpaper. And yet, both of them had independently been trying to walk into something that was impossible to see. Forget the fact that they were unconscious. I got rid of that mirror immediately. I didn't even hesitate. But the truth is, I'm still shaken by it. There has to be some rational explanation for this. There has to be. But I haven't been able to come up with one. And to this day, I still don't know what to make of it.